The first night back in the old house, Daniel woke to the sound of Marcus crying in the next room. Not loud, just that tired kind of crying a child makes when sleep won't stay. Daniel lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling he remembered from when he was a boy. The same faint crack ran across the plaster above the window. He used to trace it with his eyes when storms rolled through this town. Marcus cried again. Daniel pushed the blanket aside and walked down the narrow hallway. The floor creaked in places he hadn't stepped on in 15 years. When he opened the door, Marcus was sitting up in the bed, small shoulders shaking. "I don't like it here," Marcus whispered. Daniel sat beside him, put a hand on the boy's back. He didn't say anything for a long time. Because the truth was, he wasn't sure he liked it here either. Morning came slowly in that house. Daniel woke before Marcus. For a moment he didn't remember where he was. The room felt unfamiliar in that quiet way. Old places sometimes do after too many years away. Then he saw the window. The same wooden frame. Same pale curtains his mother had sewn decades ago. One corner hung slightly lower where the hook had loosened. He sat up and rubbed his face. The mattress dipped toward the middle just like it used to. His father had always said he would fix it. He never did. Daniel swung his legs over the side of the bed and waited there for a second, elbows on his knees. The house smelled like old wood and dust. Not unpleasant, just still. He could hear Marcus breathing down the hallway. Daniel stood and walked to the window. Outside, the town looked exactly the way it had lived in his memory, which somehow made it feel stranger. A pickup truck rolled past slowly. 2 houses down, the same oak tree leaned toward the road. Someone's dog barked once, then stopped. Nothing had rushed to greet him. The town didn't seem surprised he was back. He rested his hand on the window frame. 15 years. That number didn't feel real. Behind him, the hallway floor creaked. Daniel turned. Marcus stood in the doorway, wearing the same wrinkled t-shirt he had slept in. His hair stuck out in soft directions. He looked smaller in the doorway than he had in the apartment back in the city. "You're up," Daniel said. Marcus nodded but didn't move into the room. He looked around like he was still deciding if the place was safe. Daniel recognized the look. Kids didn't hide things very well. "You hungry?" Marcus shrugged. Daniel took that as a yes. The kitchen hadn't changed much either. The cabinets were still the same dull shade of green as Mother had painted them when he was 10. The paint had chipped near the handles. Marcus sat at the table while Daniel opened drawers, slowly searching. Forks, knives, one pan. He found a box of pancake mix in the cupboard that must have been left by the previous owner. Daniel turned it over, checking the date. "Still good. Pancakes okay?" he asked. Marcus nodded again. The boy watched quietly while Daniel mixed the batter in a bowl. The kitchen light hummed overhead. The sound filled the space between them. In the city, mornings had always felt rushed. Traffic outside, phones buzzing, coffee brewing while emails waited. Here, there was just the pan warming on the stove. Marcus swung his feet under the chair. "Why did we come here?" he asked. Daniel kept stirring. The question had been waiting since the drive. He set the spoon down. "Things didn't work out in the city," he said. Marcus frowned slightly. Daniel poured batter onto the pan. It spread slowly. "That's it?" Daniel gave a small breath through his nose. "Mostly." Marcus studied him like he wasn't sure whether to push more. Daniel flipped the pancake. The smell filled the kitchen. When he set the plate down in front of Marcus, the boy looked at it for a second before taking the fork. "You used to live here?" Marcus asked. Daniel leaned against the counter. "Yeah. For a long time?" "Long enough." Marcus ate quietly for a few minutes. Then he said, "It's really quiet." Daniel looked out the window. Yeah. The quiet was the first thing he had noticed when he arrived yesterday evening. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the absence of movement. The city always felt like something was about to happen. Here, it felt like things had already happened. Marcus finished his pancake and pushed the plate slightly away. "Can we go outside later?" Daniel nodded. "We will." Marcus seemed relieved. Kids needed space to move. This town at least had that. Daniel washed the pan while Marcus sat at the table drawing lines with his finger through a drop of syrup. The house creaked softly again. Daniel paused for a moment. Some sounds stay in your bones. He dried his hands and walked to the back door. The yard behind the house stretched farther than Marcus probably realized. Grass ran down to a thin wooden fence. Beyond it, fields rolled toward a line of trees. Daniel remembered running across that yard as a kid until his lungs burned. He stepped onto the porch. The wood bent slightly under his weight. A breeze moved through the grass. For a moment, he could almost hear his younger self laughing somewhere near the fence. He shook the thought away. Behind him, Marcus pushed the screen door open. "Can I run?" the boy asked. Daniel nodded once. Marcus didn't wait for another word. He took off across the yard with the uneven speed of a child who hadn't yet learned how to pace himself. Daniel leaned against the porch railing. Watching him run felt strange. Marcus had spent most of his life inside small spaces. Apartments, daycare rooms, sidewalks boxed in by buildings. Here the sky looked larger. Marcus reached the fence and turned around, breathing hard but smiling. "Dad," he shouted. "It's huge." Daniel gave a small wave. The wind moved again through the grass. Then a car door shut somewhere down the street. Daniel glanced toward the front of the house. A woman walked along the sidewalk carrying 2 grocery bags. She moved slowly, careful with her steps. For a second, Daniel only noticed the shape of the movement, familiar in a way he couldn't place. Then she looked up. Everything in his chest went still. Emily. She stopped walking too. The distance between them wasn't large, maybe 20 yards, but neither of them moved closer. 15 years stretched across that quiet space. Emily's hair was tied loosely behind her head. A few strands had slipped free around her face. She looked thinner than he remembered, tired in a way that wasn't just about sleep, but it was still her. Daniel stepped off the porch. Emily shifted the grocery bag slightly in her arms. "Daniel," she said. Her voice carried the same softness he remembered. He walked a few steps closer. "Hey, Em." She looked at him for a long moment, but she was checking whether memory had made a mistake. "I heard someone bought the house," she said slowly. Daniel nodded. "Yeah." Emily's eyes moved briefly toward the yard where Marcus was climbing the fence. "That your son, Marcus?" Emily watched the boy for a second. Then she looked back at Daniel. "You're really back?" It wasn't a question. Daniel didn't answer right away. Some things feel heavier when said out loud. Finally, he nodded once. "Looks that way." Emily shifted the bags again. A quiet moment passed between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. Marcus ran toward them then, stopping beside Daniel. He looked curiously at Emily. Daniel rested a hand lightly on the boy's shoulder. "Marcus," he said, "this is Emily." Marcus gave a small wave. Emily smiled at him, though the smile carried something tired underneath. "Hi, Marcus." The wind moved again down the street. Daniel realized he was holding his breath, because standing there, looking at Emily after all these years, something old had just woken up, and he wasn't sure what it meant yet. Marcus stayed close to Daniel for a minute, studying Emily the way children study people they haven't decided about yet. Emily crouched a little so she wasn't looking down at him. "You like running that yard?" she asked. Marcus nodded quickly. "It's big." Emily glanced toward the fence and then back at him. "When I was little, your dad used to try jumping over that fence." Marcus's eyes widened. "Did he make it?" Emily looked up at Daniel. There was a small pause. "Not once," she said. Marcus laughed, the quick kind that escapes before a child thinks about it. Daniel shook his head slightly. "That fence got taller every year." Emily stood again. The grocery bags rustled softly. For a moment, the 3 of them just stood there. Marcus began kicking a small stone along the sidewalk. Emily looked at Daniel more carefully now, the way someone does when the first surprise passes. "You look tired," she said quietly. Daniel didn't argue. "Long drive. That all?" He shrugged. "Mostly." Emily seemed to consider something, then nodded as if deciding not to ask more. Marcus chased the stone a few steps farther down the sidewalk. Emily watched him. "He's polite," she said. Daniel leaned slightly against the porch post. "He's figuring things out." Emily's gaze stayed on Marcus. "Aren't we all?" The sentence landed gently but didn't feel casual. Daniel remembered the way Emily used to say things like that when they were teenagers. Simple words, but they carried weight. He shifted his stance. "You still living in the same house?" he asked. Emily nodded toward the end of the street. "Never left." Daniel followed her gesture. The small white house was still there, half hidden behind a tall maple tree. He remembered riding his bike there after school. The front steps where they used to sit with cold sodas in summer. "You and your dad?" he asked. Emily's hands tightened slightly on the grocery bags. "Yeah." Daniel noticed the pause before she answered. "Is he okay?" Daniel asked. Emily let out a small breath. "He has good days." The way she said it made the rest unnecessary. Daniel nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." She gave a faint smile. "You always were." Marcus wandered back over and stood beside Daniel again. Emily watched him, something soft passing across her face. "He looks like he did when you were his age," she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's unfortunate." Marcus frowned slightly. Emily laughed quietly. "It's not." Marcus seemed satisfied with that answer. A pickup truck rolled slowly down the street behind them. The driver glanced at Daniel in that curious way people do in small towns when they notice someone new. Emily noticed it too. "Word travels fast here," she said. "I figured. Half the town probably knows you're back already." Daniel looked down the road. "Great." Emily shifted the bags again. "I should get these home." Daniel nodded. "Of course." She hesitated a moment. Then she looked at Marcus again. "You're welcome to come by sometime," she said gently. "We have a dog. Very lazy, but friendly." Marcus looked immediately at Daniel. Daniel shrugged. "Sounds okay to me." Marcus nodded with quiet excitement. Emily seemed pleased by that. Then she looked back at Daniel. "I'm glad you came back," she said. The sentence came out simple, no drama in it. But something behind it felt deeper. Daniel didn't answer right away, because he still wasn't sure whether coming back had been courage or failure. Finally he said, "We'll see." Emily accepted that answer with a small nod. She stepped back toward the sidewalk. "Take care of that fence," she added lightly. "It's undefeated." Marcus grinned. Then Emily turned and began walking toward her house. Daniel watched her go. Her steps were slower than he remembered. Not weak, just careful. Marcus tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Can we see the dog later?" he asked. "Maybe?" Marcus nodded, satisfied with the possibility. They walked back toward the porch. Marcus ran ahead again, chasing the same stone. Daniel climbed the steps slowly. The front door creaked when he opened it. Inside, the house still carried that quiet weight. He moved through the hallway, noticing things he had ignored yesterday during the rush of arriving. The small scratch on the wall where his bike handle had once hit, the faded mark where a picture frame used to hang. Marcus's footsteps echoed from the kitchen. Daniel paused halfway down the hallway. He hadn't planned to see Emily today. Truthfully, he hadn't planned to see her at all. When he decided to come back to town, he told himself it was for Marcus. Space. Quiet. A fresh start. But standing there now, he realized something else had been hiding behind that decision. Memories don't stay in the past just because you leave. Sometimes they wait exactly where you left them. Daniel stepped into the kitchen. Marcus had climbed onto the chair again. "Can we go explore the rest of the yard?" he asked. Daniel grabbed a glass from the cupboard and filled it with water. "Yeah." Marcus jumped down. They stepped outside again. The breeze had picked up slightly. Grass moved in soft waves across the yard. Marcus ran straight toward the fence again. Daniel walked more slowly. When Marcus reached the fence, he tried climbing it. Daniel watched him for a moment. "Careful," he called. Marcus laughed. "I got it." Daniel stepped off the porch and crossed the yard. The air smelled faintly like dirt and leaves. Marcus reached the top rail and balanced there proudly. "See?" he said. Daniel nodded. Just don't fall and prove Emily right. Marcus grinned. Then he jumped down. They stood by the fence together. Fields stretched beyond it, wide and empty. Marcus looked up at him. Dad? Yeah? Are we staying here for a long time? Daniel looked out over the fields. The wind moved through the grass again. He thought about the apartment they had left behind. The arguments, the silence that followed, the packed boxes, the long drive, and Emily standing in the street holding grocery bags like time had only slowed down instead of moving forward. Daniel rested his arms on the fence. I think so, he said. Marcus seemed satisfied with that answer. He started running along the fence line. Daniel stayed where he was, because something had settled quietly inside him. Not relief, not yet, but the feeling that this place, this town, might still be holding pieces of a life he never finished living. And now that he was back, those pieces had started moving again. The next few days passed quietly. Not the empty kind of quiet Daniel remembered from the first night. This one had a rhythm. Small things filling the hours. Marcus woke early every morning. Kids seemed to adjust faster than adults. By the third day, he was already running out the back door before breakfast, shoes half on, asking questions about everything he saw. What's that bird? Why does the fence lean like that? Did you have friends here? Daniel answered what he could. Some questions he let drift away. The town moved slowly around them. A mail truck passed every afternoon around 2. The same dog barked at the same car each evening. Marcus learned the yard quickly. The uneven patch near the tree roots. The loose board on the porch. Daniel fixed that one on the 4th morning. The tools were still in the small shed behind the house, rusted in places but usable. When he tightened the screws and stepped back, Marcus tested the board by jumping on it twice. Solid, the boy announced. Daniel nodded. Later that afternoon, Marcus stood at the fence again. Can we go see the dog today? He asked. Daniel had known the question was coming. Emily's house sat just 2 doors down, close enough that he had noticed her coming and going more than once during the past few days. Sometimes she walked slowly to the mailbox. Sometimes she carried grocery bags. Once she stood by the front steps for several minutes, looking down the street like she was thinking about something far away. Daniel hadn't gone over. Not yet. Some reunions feel simple. Others carry too much history. Marcus tugged his sleeve again. Dad. Daniel looked down at him. All right, he said. Let's go meet the dog. Marcus's face lit up immediately. He ran to the gate before Daniel even reached the porch. The sidewalk between the houses felt shorter than Daniel remembered. Emily's yard had changed a little. The old swing set was gone. The flower beds along the walkway looked newer, but the house itself was the same white siding with blue shutters. Marcus knocked before Daniel could say anything. The sound echoed lightly through the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then footsteps approached. The door opened slowly. Emily stood there, a little surprised. She wore a loose sweater and her hair was pulled back again. There were faint shadows under her eyes Daniel hadn't noticed before. Marcus stepped forward confidently. You said there was a dog. Emily blinked once, then smiled. That's true. She stepped aside. Well, you better come meet him. Marcus walked in immediately. Daniel followed more slowly. The inside of the house smelled faintly like tea and something medicinal. Not unpleasant, just careful. A large brown dog lifted his head from a blanket near the couch. He watched Marcus approach with slow interest but didn't move. Marcus crouched in front of him. Hi, he said softly. The dog wagged his tail once against the floor. Emily leaned against the wall near the kitchen entrance. He's old, she said. Mostly naps. Marcus gently touched the dog's ear. What's his name? Buster. Marcus nodded seriously, like the name made sense. Daniel stood near the doorway for a moment, taking in the room. The furniture looked the same. The small bookshelf, the worn couch. But there were new things too. Medical supplies neatly stacked on a side table. A folded wheelchair near the hallway. Daniel noticed it without staring. Emily saw him notice. My dad's resting, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. Okay. Marcus sat beside Buster now, whispering something to the dog. Emily watched him for a minute. He's easy with animals, she said. Daniel shrugged slightly. He listens better to them than to me. Emily smiled faintly. Then the smile faded a little. How long are you planning to stay? She asked. Daniel leaned against the door frame. Don't know yet. Emily studied him for a moment. You used to always know exactly where you were going. That was a long time ago. She didn't argue with that. Instead, she walked to the kitchen counter and poured 2 glasses of water. She handed one to him. Town feels the same? She asked. Daniel took a sip. Mostly. Emily looked toward the window. It changes slower than people do. Marcus laughed suddenly from the floor. Buster had rolled onto his back, paws in the air. Marcus looked delighted. Emily watched them quietly. Her shoulders seemed to relax for the first time since Daniel had arrived. Daniel noticed. You don't get many visitors, he asked. Emily shook her head. Not really. Friends, she hesitated. People get busy. Daniel understood the kind of sentence that was. Marcus stood up then. Can Buster come outside? Emily chuckled softly. If he feels like it. Marcus looked at the dog expectantly. Buster blinked, then slowly climbed to his feet. Marcus cheered quietly like he had just accomplished something important. Emily opened the back door. Marcus and the dog wandered into the yard together. Their voices faded slightly. For a moment the house became still. Emily leaned lightly against the kitchen counter. Daniel stood across from her. Neither of them spoke right away. Some silences carry comfort. Others carry questions. This one held both. Emily finally said, You left fast back then. Daniel looked down at the glass in his hand. Yeah, you didn't say goodbye. The sentence wasn't angry, just factual. Daniel rubbed his thumb along the rim of the glass. I know. Emily studied his face carefully. I thought maybe you'd write. Daniel didn't answer. Outside, Marcus laughed again as Buster wandered through the grass. Emily glanced toward the sound. Then she looked back at Daniel. Well, she said quietly, you're here now. Daniel nodded. He wasn't sure yet what that meant. But standing in Emily's kitchen again after all these years, he felt something shifting beneath the surface of everything he thought he understood. Marcus stayed outside with Buster longer than the dog probably preferred. Through the back window, Daniel could see the boy walking slowly beside him, matching the dog's lazy pace like it was a serious responsibility. Buster stopped often. Marcus waited every time. Emily watched them from the kitchen sink. He'll sleep for 3 hours after this, she said quietly. Daniel leaned against the counter. Marcus? Buster. Daniel gave a small nod. Fair. Emily dried her hands with a towel and folded it carefully before setting it down. The movements were slow, practiced. Daniel noticed she moved like someone used to keeping the house quiet, not the quiet of peace, the quiet of care. Your dad asleep? Daniel asked. Emily nodded. Most afternoons. She glanced toward the hallway where the wheelchair sat. He has treatments in the morning. They take a lot out of him. Daniel followed her glance. How long? Emily knew what he meant. Almost 3 years. Daniel let that settle. 3 years of mornings. 3 years of nights. Do you have help? He asked. Emily shook her head once. Sometimes a nurse stops by. Mostly it's me. She said it without bitterness. Just truth. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. That's a lot. Emily looked toward the window again where Marcus was, now trying to show Buster how to jump over a stick. Routine helps, she said. Another pause followed. Daniel studied the room again. The same photograph still hung along the wall. School pictures. A faded one of Emily and her father fishing at the lake when she was small, and one near the end of the row. Daniel recognized it instantly. 2 kids sitting on the edge of the town bridge. Him and Emily. Bare feet hanging over the water. He hadn't known she kept that one. Emily noticed where he was looking. I thought about taking it down once, she said. Daniel looked back at her. Why didn't you? Emily shrugged faintly. It felt dishonest. The sentence stayed in the air between them. Outside, Marcus finally convinced Buster to hop over the stick once. The boy shouted in victory. Emily smiled softly at the sound. "He's good for this house," she said. Daniel looked out the window too. Marcus was kneeling beside Buster now, talking into the dog's ear like it was an important meeting. "He's been through a lot," Daniel said. Emily glanced at him. "You too." Daniel didn't respond. Some things didn't need explanation. Marcus suddenly pushed the back door open and burst inside. "Buster jumped," he announced. Emily gasped lightly in exaggerated surprise. "He did?" Marcus nodded proudly, twice. Buster wandered in behind him and collapsed onto his blanket again with a deep sigh. Marcus dropped onto the floor beside him. "Can we come back tomorrow?" he asked. Emily looked at Daniel first. Daniel gave a small nod. "If Emily's okay with that." Emily smiled. "I think Buster would like that." Marcus looked satisfied and began scratching behind the dog's ears again. Emily walked toward the hallway. "I should check on my dad," she said. She paused halfway there. "Stay if you want." Daniel nodded. "Okay." She disappeared down the hallway quietly. The house settled again. Marcus eventually leaned against Buster's side and started telling the dog about the fence in Daniel's yard. Daniel sat in a chair near the window. The sunlight in the room felt softer than he remembered. Time moved differently here. A few minutes later, Emily returned. "He's still asleep," she said. Marcus waved at her from the floor. "Buster's teaching me patience." Emily laughed quietly. "That's his specialty." She sat down across from Daniel. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emily said almost casually, "Do you remember the lake road?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Of course. You used to ride your bike out there when you got angry." Daniel looked at her. "You remember that? You thought nobody noticed." Daniel gave a faint smile. "I guess I wasn't very subtle." Emily leaned back in her chair. "You always came back calmer." Daniel stared toward the window. Riding helped. Emily watched him. "You still get angry?" Daniel thought about that. "Not the same way." "How then?" Daniel took a moment before answering. "Quieter." Emily seemed to understand exactly what he meant. Marcus yawned loudly on the floor. Buster didn't move. Emily glanced at the clock. "Someone's getting tired." Marcus rubbed his eyes. "I'm not." Emily raised an eyebrow. Daniel stood. "That's our cue." Marcus groaned softly but stood up. He hugged Buster's neck. "Bye." Buster wagged his tail once without opening his eyes. Marcus walked toward the door reluctantly. Emily followed them to the front porch. The evening light had begun settling over the street. Marcus walked ahead toward Daniel's yard, dragging a stick behind him along the sidewalk. Emily leaned lightly against the porch rail. Daniel stayed a moment. "You've done a lot here," he said. Emily looked down the street. "You get used to carrying things." Daniel studied her face. There were lines of tiredness there now that hadn't existed when they were young. But something else too. Strength, maybe. "You don't have to do it alone," he said quietly. Emily looked at him, surprised by the sentence. Then she smiled gently. "I know." The answer sounded polite, not dismissive. Just careful. Marcus shouted from the yard. "Dad, the sky is turning pink." Daniel glanced back at him. "Coming." Emily stepped back toward her door. "See you tomorrow," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yeah." He walked across the small stretch of grass toward Marcus. Behind him, the door closed softly. Marcus stood at the fence again, watching the sky. "It's different here," the boy said. Daniel rested his arms on the fence beside him. "How?" Marcus thought about it. "People talk slower." Daniel looked down the street. Emily's porch light had turned on. "Yeah," he said quietly. "They do." Marcus leaned his head lightly against Daniel's arm. They watched the sky darken together. And somewhere deep inside Daniel, something that had been locked away for a long time had begun to loosen. Not quickly, not completely, but enough to remind him that coming back here might not just be about escaping the life he lost. It might be about facing the one he left behind. A week passed before Daniel saw Emily outside again. Not that he hadn't looked. Every morning Marcus asked if they could visit Buster. Sometimes they did. Sometimes Emily waved from the doorway, but said her father needed rest. Marcus accepted that more easily than Daniel expected. Kids understood limits better than adults sometimes. That morning Daniel was fixing the back gate when he heard footsteps on the sidewalk. Slow ones. He didn't look up immediately. The hinge needed tightening. But he knew. Some people you recognize by sound before sight. Morning, Emily said. Daniel straightened and wiped his hands on his jeans. Morning. She held a small paper bag from the bakery in town. Thought Marcus might like these, she said. Daniel took the bag. You didn't have to. Emily shrugged slightly. I was there anyway. Marcus appeared instantly from somewhere behind the house like he had heard the word bakery from a mile away. What is it? Emily crouched and opened the bag. Blueberry muffins. Marcus looked at Daniel for permission. Daniel nodded. Marcus grabbed one carefully like it might disappear. Thank you, he said with a mouth already full. Emily smiled. You're welcome. Marcus wandered toward the porch to eat. Emily stood again. Daniel noticed the tiredness more clearly today. Not dramatic, just a constant weight behind her eyes. You've been busy, he said. Emily leaned lightly against the fence. My dad had a rough week. Daniel waited. He fell Tuesday night, she said. Daniel's shoulders tightened. Is he okay? Emily nodded. Nothing broken. But, Emily looked down at the grass, he scared himself. That explained the heaviness in her voice. Daniel knew that kind of fear, when a body suddenly stops trusting itself. Does he use the chair now? Daniel asked. Sometimes. Emily glanced toward her house. He hates it. Daniel could imagine. Marcus ran past them chasing a butterfly, crumbs still on his shirt. Emily watched him go. He's full of life, she said softly. Daniel rested his hands on the fence. He reminds me to keep moving. Emily nodded slightly. Kids do that. A quiet moment passed. Wind moved through the tall grass again. Emily broke the silence. I almost didn't recognize you when you first came back. Daniel half smiled. Better or worse, Emily thought about it. Different. She looked at him more carefully. You carry things differently now. Daniel didn't argue. Emily folded her arms loosely. What happened in the city? Daniel had expected the question eventually. He took a breath. Marcus's mom left. Emily didn't react immediately, just waited. About a year ago, he added. Emily nodded once. Hard? Daniel looked out toward the fields. Yeah. Emily didn't press further. Marcus ran back over holding the muffin wrapper. Can I have another one? Daniel raised an eyebrow. Already? Marcus nodded. Emily handed him one before Daniel could answer. Marcus grinned and ran away again. Emily watched him. You're good with him, she said. Daniel leaned his shoulder against the fence. I'm trying. Emily's eyes stayed on Marcus. He trusts you. Daniel followed her gaze. Marcus was now trying to share the muffin with a bird that had absolutely no interest in it. He deserves stability, Daniel said. Emily nodded slowly. So do you. Daniel let out a quiet breath. That part's harder. Emily seemed to understand. They stood there for a while without speaking. Marcus eventually sat in the grass and began building something with sticks. Emily spoke again. Sometimes I forget what normal days look like. Daniel looked at her. How do you mean? Emily gestured faintly toward her house. Caregiving changes time. Daniel listened. Everything becomes measured, she continued. Medication times, doctor calls, watching for small changes. Her voice stayed calm. But after a while, you realize months passed and you didn't think about anything else. Daniel studied her face. You miss things. Emily gave a small nod. Sometimes I miss being someone else. The sentence came out so quietly Daniel almost missed it. Someone else how? He asked. Emily looked down at the ground. I used to paint. Daniel blinked. I remember. Emily smiled faintly. My room was a disaster. Paint everywhere. She nodded. Canvas stacked against the wall. Daniel leaned his arms on the fence. What happened? Emily glanced toward her house again. Life got smaller. The words held no bitterness. Just acceptance. Marcus suddenly stood up. Dad, look! He held up a crooked stick structure. What is it? Daniel asked. Marcus thought about it. A fort. Emily smiled. Strong walls. Marcus nodded proudly. Daniel watched him for a moment. Then he looked back at Emily. You should paint again. Emily shook her head lightly. I wouldn't know where to start. Daniel shrugged. Same place you stopped. Emily studied him for a moment like she was deciding whether to believe that was possible. Then she looked away. I should go check on my dad. Daniel nodded. Emily pushed off the fence. Before walking away, she paused. Thank you for being here, she said quietly. Daniel frowned slightly. For muffins? Emily shook her head. For the street not feeling so empty. Then she walked back toward her house. Daniel watched her until the door closed. Marcus ran up beside him. Can Emily come see my fort later? Daniel rested his hand on Marcus's shoulder. Maybe. Marcus nodded and ran back to the grass. Daniel stayed by the fence, because Emily's words had left something behind in the air, the street not feeling so empty. And Daniel realized something slowly. Sometimes helping someone isn't about fixing anything. Sometimes it's just about showing up often enough that loneliness doesn't feel permanent. That afternoon, the sky turned gray. Not storm dark, just the quiet kind of gray that settles over fields when the day is thinking about rain. Marcus didn't seem to notice. He stayed outside working on his fort, which had slowly expanded from 3 sticks to an entire crooked fence of branches. Daniel sat on the porch steps watching. Marcus kept bringing pieces over. This one's a wall. This one's a lookout tower. This one is defense. Daniel nodded at each explanation like they were serious architectural plans. After a while, Marcus asked, Did you build forts when you were little? Daniel leaned back on his hands. Sometimes. With friends. Daniel thought about it. Yeah. Marcus placed another branch. Where are they now? The question came without any weight behind it. Just curiosity. Daniel watched the gray sky for a moment. Different places, he said. Marcus accepted that answer easily. Kids rarely chase the past unless adults taught them to. A car door closed down the street. Daniel looked up. Emily was helping an older man down the steps of her house. Daniel recognized him instantly, even though the years had changed him. Mr. Carter. Emily's father moved slowly, one hand gripping the rail, the other resting lightly on Emily's arm. Daniel stood without thinking. Marcus noticed and followed his gaze. Who's that? Emily's dad. Marcus watched quietly. Emily guided her father toward a chair on the small front porch. She moved carefully, steady but gentle. Her father lowered himself down with visible effort. Emily crouched beside him for a moment, saying something Daniel couldn't hear. The old man nodded. Daniel hesitated only a second before stepping off the porch. Stay here, he told Marcus. Marcus nodded, still watching. Daniel walked down the sidewalk. Emily noticed him halfway across the street. For a moment, she looked surprised. Then she gave a small, tired smile. Hey, she said. Daniel stopped at the bottom of the steps. Hi. Emily's father looked up slowly. His face had grown thinner, the lines deeper than Daniel remembered. But the eyes were the same. Daniel, the old man said. Daniel nodded. Good to see you, sir. Mr. Fine. Carter studied him for a moment. You got older. Daniel smiled faintly. So did you. The old man chuckled softly at that. Emily folded her arms loosely. He just needed some air, she explained. Mr. Carter glanced toward the fields. Doctor says fresh air helps. Daniel nodded. I used to hear that a lot growing up. Mr. Carter looked back at him. You used to spend half your time in this yard. Daniel leaned lightly against the porch rail. Emily's dad made better lemonade than my dad. Emily laughed quietly. That's still true. Marcus appeared beside Daniel suddenly. He had ignored the instruction to stay put. He stood close, slightly shy. Emily's father noticed him. "Well now," the old man said slowly, "who's this?" Marcus looked at Daniel. Daniel rested a hand on his shoulder. "This is my son, Marcus." Marcus gave a small wave. Mr. Carter smiled gently. "Nice to meet you, Marcus." Marcus stepped a little closer. "I built a fort." Mr. Carter raised his eyebrows. "Strong one?" Marcus nodded proudly. "Very." Emily looked amused. "You'll have to show us sometime." Marcus brightened. "Okay." Mr. Carter shifted slightly in his chair. The movement cost him more energy than he tried to show. Daniel noticed. Emily noticed Daniel noticing. The moment passed quietly. After a minute, Mr. Carter spoke again. "You staying in town, Daniel?" Daniel nodded. "For a while." The old man looked toward Emily briefly, then back at Daniel. "Good." He didn't explain the word, but it carried meaning. Emily glanced at her father. "You getting tired?" He shook his head. "Just resting." Marcus leaned toward Daniel. "Can he see my fort now?" Daniel crouched beside him. "Maybe another day." Marcus seemed to consider that. Then he nodded. Emily looked grateful for the restraint. They stood there a little longer. The gray sky thickened overhead. Finally Emily said softly, "I should get him back inside." Daniel stepped back from the porch. "Of course." Mr. Carter looked at Daniel again. "Don't disappear again," he said. The sentence was quiet, not accusing, just direct. Daniel met his eyes. "I won't." Emily helped her father stand carefully. Marcus watched with wide eyes. The old man moved slowly toward the door. Before going inside, he turned back once. "Your mother would have liked that boy," he said. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. "Thank you," he replied quietly. The door closed behind them. Marcus looked up at Daniel. "He seems nice." Daniel nodded. "He is." Marcus grabbed his hand. "Can we finish the fort?" Daniel looked down the street one more time. Emily's curtain shifted slightly in the window. Then he turned back toward the yard. "Yeah," he said. They walked across the grass together. Marcus immediately started adjusting the crooked walls. Daniel knelt beside him and helped anchor one of the sticks deeper into the ground. The structure leaned badly. Marcus stepped back to inspect it. "It's not perfect," he admitted. Daniel looked at the uneven lines. "No," he said. Marcus frowned slightly. Then Daniel added, "But it'll hold." Marcus seemed satisfied with that. The first drop of rain landed in the grass beside them. Then another. Marcus looked up. "Storm? Maybe." Marcus didn't seem worried. He just picked up another stick. Daniel stayed there beside him while the light rain began to fall. Because something about this moment felt important. Not dramatic, not life-changing. Just two people building something imperfect in a quiet yard while the sky darkened overhead. And sometimes, that's exactly how a life begins to steady itself again. The rain that afternoon didn't last long. Just enough to darken the dirt and bend the grass for an hour before the clouds drifted away again. Marcus insisted the fort had survived the storm. Daniel didn't argue. By the next morning, sunlight pushed through the kitchen window in a way that made the house feel less like a memory and more like a place someone could actually live. Marcus sat at the table eating cereal. Half of it ended up on the floor. Buster would have handled that problem easily, but Buster lived 2 houses down. Marcus looked up suddenly. "Can we go see Emily today?" Daniel poured coffee and leaned against the counter. "We were just there yesterday." Marcus shrugged. "Buster misses me." Daniel watched the boy for a moment. "Or you miss Buster." Marcus considered that. "Maybe both." Daniel took a sip of coffee. "Let Emily have a quiet morning." Marcus accepted that more easily than expected. Instead, he grabbed a small notebook and began drawing something that looked suspiciously like the fort. Daniel stepped onto the porch. The street looked peaceful in the early light. A few cars parked along the curb, someone watering flowers farther down. Emily's house looked quiet. Her porch chair sat empty. Daniel leaned on the railing, letting the coffee warm his hands. He had started noticing small changes in his days here. Not big ones, just quiet adjustments. waking without the tight feeling in his chest, sleeping deeper, listening to Marcus laugh outside without immediately worrying about the next problem waiting around the corner. The city had always felt like a place where you ran forward even when you were tired. Here it felt like you could stop long enough to breathe. A screen door opened behind him. Marcus stepped out holding the notebook. "Look," he said. Daniel glanced down. The drawing showed a crooked structure with a flag on top. "That's a serious fort," Daniel said. Marcus nodded proudly. "I added a tower." Daniel looked back toward Emily's house again. Movement at the window caught his attention. Emily pulled the curtains slightly aside, then paused when she noticed him looking. For a second, they just watched each other through the quiet space between houses. Then she gave a small wave. Daniel lifted his hand in return. Marcus noticed. "Is she awake?" "Looks like it." Marcus immediately started toward the yard gate. Daniel caught his shoulder. "Give her time." Marcus sighed. "Okay." He wandered toward the grass instead. Daniel stayed on the porch. A few minutes later, Emily stepped outside. She carried a mug in one hand. The morning light showed more clearly how tired she looked today. But when she noticed Marcus waving wildly from the yard, she smiled. Daniel walked down to the fence as she approached the sidewalk. "Morning," she said. "Morning." Marcus ran over. "Buster awake?" Emily chuckled softly. "Always." Marcus seemed relieved. Emily looked at Daniel. "Rough night," she admitted. Daniel nodded toward the house. "Your dad?" "Yeah." She took a sip from the mug. "Some days are harder than others." Daniel rested his arms on the fence. "You get any sleep?" Emily thought about it. "A little." Marcus leaned against the fence beside Daniel. "I made a tower," he announced. Emily crouched slightly to see the drawing. "That's impressive." Marcus pointed proudly. "This is the lookout." Emily studied it seriously. "Every good fort needs one." Marcus seemed satisfied. He ran back toward the grass again. Emily stood up slowly. Daniel noticed the stiffness in her movement. "You're running on fumes," he said quietly. Emily didn't deny it. "You get used to it." Daniel shook his head lightly. "That doesn't make it okay." Emily leaned on the fence beside him. "What would you suggest?" Daniel thought for a moment. "An hour." Emily looked confused. "Of what?" "Of not worrying about anything." Emily gave a tired smile. "That's not really how this works." Daniel nodded toward Marcus playing in the yard. "Let him show you the fort." Emily followed his gaze. Marcus was now adjusting one of the walls. "He worked hard on it," Daniel added. Emily considered that. "My dad might need something," Daniel said gently. "If he does, I'll come get you." Emily looked at him. "You do that?" Daniel shrugged. "On 2 houses away." Emily studied his face like she was measuring the offer. Finally, she said quietly, "Okay." Marcus noticed them walking across the yard and ran over excitedly. "Come see." Emily followed him. Daniel hung back near the porch. Marcus explained every part of the structure with serious detail. "This is the gate, but you have to knock." Emily knocked politely on an imaginary door. Marcus opened it. "Welcome." Emily stepped inside the crooked walls and sat cross-legged in the grass. Marcus looked delighted. Daniel watched from the porch steps. For the first time since he came back, Emily looked lighter. Not completely, but enough to notice. Marcus handed her the stick that served as the tower flag. "You guard the fort," he told her. Emily saluted. "Yes, Captain." Marcus ran off to collect more building materials. Emily looked up at Daniel. "You planned this?" Daniel shook his head. "Marcus did." Emily leaned back against one of the crooked walls. The wind moved softly across the yard. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Emily said quietly, almost to herself, "I forgot what it feels like to sit in the sun." Daniel looked out over the grass. "Feels normal," he said. Emily nodded. "Yeah." Marcus returned carrying 2 more sticks. "The fort's getting bigger," he announced. Emily stood. "Then we better reinforce the walls." Daniel stepped down from the porch and joined them. Marcus handed him a stick like he had been waiting for that moment. Daniel pushed it into the ground beside the others. The structure leaned again. Marcus stepped back to inspect it. Emily tilted her head. "Not perfect," she said. Daniel glanced at her. She smiled slightly. "But it'll hold." Marcus grinned. The three of them stood there in the uneven circle of sticks, the street quiet around them. And Daniel realized something slowly. Life doesn't rebuild itself in big dramatic moments. It happens like this. Small shifts. A tired woman sitting in the sun. A child building crooked walls. Someone deciding to stay long enough to help hold them up. The fort stayed standing for 3 days. Marcus checked it every morning like a construction supervisor, making sure the walls hadn't moved overnight. Sometimes a stick leaned more than before. Sometimes one fell out completely. Marcus always fixed it. Daniel watched him from the porch with a quiet kind of admiration. The boy never complained about rebuilding something that refused to stay perfect. That afternoon the sky cleared again, after a morning of clouds. Emily hadn't come outside yet. Daniel noticed, not in a worried way at first, just in the quiet way you notice when a pattern changes. Marcus noticed too. "Emily's not up," he said. Daniel checked the street. Her curtains were still closed. "She might be resting," he said. Marcus nodded slowly but kept glancing toward the house. By midday, Daniel decided to walk over. Marcus insisted on coming. They knocked gently. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened a few inches. Emily stood there, hair loose around her face. She looked like she had slept in pieces instead of hours. "Hey," she said quietly. Daniel studied her expression. "Everything okay?" Emily opened the door wider. "My dad had a rough morning." Marcus peeked past her shoulder. "Hi." Emily smiled at him. "Hi, Marcus." Her voice softened a little when she spoke to him. Marcus held up the notebook. "I made the fort stronger." Emily looked genuinely impressed. "That was fast." Marcus nodded proudly. Daniel kept his voice low. "Is there anything you need?" Emily hesitated. Then she said, "Actually, maybe." Daniel waited. "He needs help getting to the chair sometimes," she admitted. "I've been managing, but—" The sentence trailed off. Daniel nodded. "Show me." Emily stepped aside. Marcus followed quietly behind them into the living room. Mr. Poyne, Carter sat near the hallway in the wheelchair. His shoulders seemed smaller than they had even a week ago, but his eyes brightened when he saw Daniel. "You again," he said. Daniel smiled slightly. "Still here." Emily stood beside the chair. "He's stubborn today," she said. Mr. Carter grumbled. "I heard that." Daniel crouched slightly beside him. "Where are we headed?" "Porch," the old man said. Emily looked relieved just hearing him say the word. "Fresh air again," Daniel said. Mr. Carter nodded once. "Doctor keeps saying it." Daniel positioned himself beside the chair. "All right." Emily watched carefully as Daniel helped guide the chair toward the door. The movement took patience, but Daniel moved slowly, letting Mr. Carter set the pace. Marcus held the door open like it was an official job. When they reached the porch, the old man closed his eyes briefly as the breeze touched his face. "Better," he said. Emily leaned against the doorframe. The relief on her face was quiet but unmistakable. Marcus sat cross-legged on the porch floor. "I built a fort," he announced. Mr. Carter opened one eye. "Did you now?" Marcus nodded. "It survived a storm. That's important." Marcus seemed satisfied with the seriousness of the reply. Daniel rested his hands on the porch railing. The breeze moved softly through the trees. Emily stood beside him. "You didn't have to do that," she said under her breath. Daniel shrugged. "I was nearby." Emily shook her head faintly. "You always say things like that." Daniel glanced at her. "Like what?" "Like helping is nothing." Daniel thought about that. Sometimes it isn't. Emily looked out across the street toward the crooked fort. Marcus had pointed it out to Mr. Carter, who studied it like it might actually defend something. After a moment, Emily said quietly, "I forgot what sharing the weight felt like." Daniel didn't answer immediately, because some sentences deserve space. Marcus stood up suddenly. "Can he see the fort?" Emily looked at her father. Mr. Carter gave a slow nod. If someone drives me. Marcus looked at Daniel immediately. Daniel smiled. Captain's orders. Emily laughed softly. Together they wheeled the chair across the sidewalk and into Daniel's yard. Marcus ran ahead to open the imaginary gate. Knock first, he called. Daniel knocked on an invisible door. Marcus opened it with full ceremony. Welcome. Mr. Carter studied the crooked walls carefully. Strong construction, he said. Marcus beamed. Emily stood just outside the fort, watching the moment unfold. The wind moved gently across the yard. For a brief time, the heaviness she carried seemed to step back. Not gone, just resting. Daniel noticed. Marcus placed the notebook in Mr. Carter's lap. This is the blueprint. Mr. Carter adjusted his glasses and examined the drawing. Professional work. Marcus looked like someone had just handed him an award. Daniel leaned on the fence beside Emily. She spoke quietly. You've changed. Daniel glanced at her. Everyone says that. I don't mean older. What then? Emily watched Marcus showing the tower. You used to rush into things. Daniel thought about that. Now? Emily looked at him. Now you stay. Daniel didn't respond. But something about the words settled into him. Stay. Marcus finished the tour of the fort. Mr. Carter leaned back in the chair, looking satisfied. Best defense system in town, he said. Marcus saluted. Daniel walked the chair slowly back toward Emily's house. Emily stayed beside him this time. Halfway across the yard, she said quietly, I don't remember the last day that felt this normal. Daniel glanced toward the fort behind them. It's a good day, he said. Emily nodded. Yeah. Marcus ran ahead again, chasing the wind like it was something he could catch. Daniel watched him. Then he looked at Emily. For a moment, neither of them spoke, because the truth had begun to show itself slowly, the way most important truths do. This wasn't just about helping a neighbor, or letting a child play with a dog, or fixing small things in an old house. Something else was forming here. Quiet, patient, like the first steady bricks of a life being built again. Not perfect, but strong enough to hold. Autumn arrived slowly. The first sign was the air. Cooler in the mornings. The kind of cold that made Marcus pull the sleeves of his shirt over his hands while he ate breakfast. Daniel noticed it when he stepped onto the porch before sunrise. The grass held a thin layer of dew. The fields beyond the fence had started turning a dull gold. Marcus didn't care about the seasons changing. He cared that the fort was still standing. Every morning he checked it before anything else. Sometimes Daniel watched from the kitchen window while the boy inspected the crooked walls like they were protecting something important. Maybe they were. Across the street, Emily's house had begun opening its curtains earlier in the mornings. Some days she stepped outside with tea and sat quietly while Marcus rebuilt parts of the fort. Other days she stayed inside longer. Daniel had learned not to ask immediately when those days happened. Caregiving had its own rhythm. One afternoon, Marcus ran into the kitchen out of breath. Emily's calling you. Daniel set down the dish he was drying. Everything okay? Marcus nodded quickly. She said, come quick. Daniel stepped outside. Emily stood near the gate of her yard. Her expression was calm, but something about the way she held her shoulders made Daniel walk faster. What happened? He asked. Emily nodded toward the porch. My dad wants to talk to you. Daniel glanced at her. Is he all right? Emily gave a small breath. He's tired. They walked across the street together. Mr. Sile. Carter sat in the same porch chair he'd been using for weeks now. A blanket rested over his legs even though the afternoon wasn't cold. When he saw Daniel, he lifted a hand slightly. Took you long enough, the old man said. Daniel smiled faintly and stepped closer. Marcus runs faster than me. Mr. Carter looked toward the yard where Marcus was already back at the fort. That boy's got energy. Daniel leaned against the porch rail. You wanted to talk? The old man studied him carefully. Years of quiet observation sat behind those eyes. You remember the promise you made to Emily when you were kids? The question landed unexpectedly. Daniel blinked once. Emily stood a few steps behind him. He hadn't thought about that promise in years. Or maybe he had, just not out loud. I remember, Daniel said slowly. Mr. Carter nodded. You said you'd always look out for her. Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. That was a long time ago. Mr. Carter gave a soft hum. Some promises don't expire. Emily looked down at the porch floor. Daniel glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the old man. Why are you asking about that now, Mr. Breston? Carter rested his hands on the blanket. Because I'm not going to be here forever. Emily inhaled quietly. Daniel stayed still. The sentence wasn't dramatic, just honest. Mr. Maddock, Carter continued, I see the way she carries everything. Daniel didn't argue with that. The old man looked toward Marcus in the yard, and I see the way you show up. Emily shifted slightly behind them. Daniel rubbed his hand along the porch rail. I'm not trying to replace anything. Mr. Carter shook his head slowly. That's not what I'm saying. A breeze moved across the street. The fort's crooked tower leaned slightly but stayed standing. The old man watched it. Life breaks people in quiet ways, he said. Daniel listened. Sometimes the best thing someone can do is stay. The word echoed something Emily had said weeks earlier. Daniel felt it settle again. Stay. Mr. Carter looked back at him. Are you staying, Daniel? Daniel didn't answer immediately, because the truth had been building quietly inside him for weeks now. In the mornings with Marcus, in the quiet afternoons when Emily finally sat in the sun. In the small moments where helping didn't feel like effort anymore. He looked across the street. Marcus was adjusting the tower again. Emily stood quietly beside the porch rail. Daniel realized something then. He hadn't been counting the days here anymore, the way he used to. He turned back to Mr. Carter. Yes, he said simply. The old man studied his face for a long moment. Then he nodded. Good. Emily wiped quickly at the corner of her eye before anyone could comment. Marcus suddenly ran over. Dad, the tower fell again. Daniel glanced at the fort. Looks like we've got work to do. Marcus grabbed his hand immediately. Mr. Carter chuckled softly from the chair. Strong walls need maintenance. Daniel nodded. That's true. He walked toward the yard with Marcus pulling him along. Behind him, Emily helped her father adjust the blanket. Daniel knelt beside the fort. Marcus handed him the tower stick. This part's important, the boy said seriously. Daniel pushed the stick deeper into the ground. The fort leaned again, but didn't collapse. Marcus stepped back and nodded approvingly. Daniel sat back on his heels. Across the street, Emily stood on the porch beside her father. The late afternoon sun lit the quiet street, and Daniel understood something clearly now. The promise he made as a boy hadn't disappeared. Life had just taken a long path before bringing him back to it. Not with grand gestures, not with dramatic moments, just with small decisions made again and again. To help, to stay, to build something imperfect that still held. The days after that conversation felt quieter, not in a heavy way, just steadier. Marcus still woke early. The fort still needed repairs almost every morning. Buster still wandered over whenever the gate was left open. But something subtle had shifted. Daniel noticed it first in Emily. She still carried the same responsibilities. Her father still needed help getting from the bed to the chair, from the chair to the porch, from the porch back inside again. But she wasn't carrying it alone in the same way anymore. Some mornings Daniel crossed the street without knocking. Not because anything dramatic had happened, just because a chair needed moving, or groceries needed carrying, or because Mr. Carter wanted to sit outside and watch Marcus reinforce the defense system. The old man seemed to enjoy that part most. One afternoon, he sat on the porch with a blanket over his knees, watching Marcus push another crooked branch into the ground. You know, he said slowly, fortifications used to be my job. Marcus turned. Really? Mr. Carter nodded. Army engineering. Marcus looked deeply impressed. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You never told me that. Mr. Carter gave a faint smile. You never asked. Marcus immediately began explaining his design improvements. Mr. Carter listened seriously. Emily stood in the doorway watching the conversation unfold. Daniel noticed the way her shoulders rested more naturally now. Less tension. Not gone, but softer. Later that evening, Marcus fell asleep early. The fort had taken most of his energy. Daniel stepped onto the porch after cleaning the kitchen. The air carried the smell of fallen leaves now. Across the street, Emily sat on the edge of her steps with a mug in her hands. Daniel walked over quietly. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. Marcus asleep? Out cold? Emily nodded. That fort is serious business. Daniel sat down beside her. For a moment they just listened to the quiet street. Then Emily said softly, "My dad likes you being here." Daniel glanced toward the window where a faint light still burned. "I like him to." Emily traced the rim of the mug with her thumb. "He worries about me." Daniel didn't say anything. Emily continued, "He always has." The porch light above them flickered once before settling again. Emily spoke again after a moment. "You remember the lake road?" Daniel nodded. "You used to ride there when things got heavy." Daniel leaned back slightly. "Still might." Emily smiled faintly. "Some things don't change." Daniel looked out across the street toward the crooked fort. The tower leaned again. "It probably wouldn't survive the winter." "That promise you made when we were kids," Emily said quietly. Daniel turned toward her. "You remember it too?" Emily nodded. "You told me I'd never have to face the world alone." Daniel rubbed his hands together slowly. "I was 12. Emily looked at him carefully. "Still counts." The sentence sat between them. The night air cooled a little more. Daniel finally spoke. "I didn't come back here because of that promise." Emily nodded. "I know." He paused. "But staying," he added. Emily watched him closely. "That part might have something to do with it." Her eyes softened. They sat there for a long moment without speaking. Not awkward. Just honest. Inside the house behind them, Miss Strumbine. Carter coughed lightly. Emily stood. "I should check on him." Daniel rose too. "I'll come by in the morning." Emily looked at him. "You don't have to schedule it." Daniel shrugged. "Habit." She smiled gently. "You always were dependable in strange ways." Daniel watched her reach the door. Before going inside, she turned back. "Daniel?" "Yeah? Thank you." He didn't answer right away, because gratitude didn't feel like the right word for what this had become. Finally, he said quietly, "You do the same." Emily nodded once. Then she disappeared inside. Daniel walked back across the street. The yard felt calm under the dim porch light. He paused beside the fort. One of the walls had leaned outward again. Marcus would notice in the morning. Daniel pushed the stick back into place. Not perfect, but it held. He stood there for a moment looking at the quiet house, the quiet street, the quiet life forming around them. Months passed like that. Winter came and softened the fields with frost. Marcus started school in town. Buster grew slower, but still visited the yard. Mr. Carter's health faded gradually, the way sunsets fade instead of dropping suddenly. But he had many good afternoons on the porch. Emily began painting again during the rare quiet hours. At first, small canvases, then larger ones. The spare room in her house slowly filled with color again. Daniel saw the difference in her long before she admitted it. Years later, when people asked how their lives came back together, Daniel never told the story like a dramatic rescue. He remembered it differently. A crooked fort in the yard, a tired woman sitting in the sun for the first time in months, a boy laughing beside an old dog, and a promise made by a child that somehow found its way back into the life of the man he became. When Daniel and Emily finally married, Marcus stood beside them holding a small drawing. It showed a fort, crooked walls, a tall tower, and 3 stick figures standing inside it. Marcus had written one sentence at the top: "Strong walls." Daniel kept that drawing long after the fort itself disappeared. Because the truth was simple. They never rebuilt their lives all at once. They built them the same way Marcus built that fort, one uneven piece at a time, until, somehow, it held. Ha!